session of T.R.V. Murti lecture series, and the speaker will be Professor D.K. Mohanta, and the lecture will be presided over by Professor D.N. Tiwari. So, Professor D.N. Tiwari are requested to come on the dais. Sir, please. Now, may I request both the dignitaries to offer garlands to the bust of Malviyaji, the honorable founder of this university. May I request Professor Anand Mishra, sir, head of the Department of Philosophy and Religion, to felicitate both the dignitaries with garland. Professor D.N. Tiwari is being felicitated, and Professor D.K. Mohanta is being felicitated. Now, Professor D.K. Mohanta will deliver his lecture, and he will speak on the topic No Thesis Argument and Nagarjuna. So before the formal start of his lecture, I would like to introduce his brief bio note with you. Professor Dilip Kumar Mohanta is the senior most professor of philosophy at the University of Calcutta. He has been a former vice chancellor of the University of Kalyani and also the first vice chancellor of Sanskrit University, Kolkata. Professor Mohanta is a former member of Indian Council of Philosophical Research, New Delhi, and presently Joint Secretary of Indian Philosophical Congress. He is the recipient of Associate of Inter-University Center of UGC at Indian Institute of Advanced Studies, Simla, during 2001 to 2003. US government state scholarship during 2008 at the University of California, Santa Barbara, and Fulbright visiting lecturer fellowship at the University of Florida during 2011, and William Patton Fellowship at the School of Philosophy, University of Birmingham in 2015. He is also a recipient of Jan Jacobson Award for the research in 2016, Professor B.M. Barua Memorial Samman in 2016, and recently Manju Sri Samman in 2022, Kamala Devi Jain Smriti Samman Award in 2022. He edited 4 and authored 15 books and 80 research articles, mainly on classical Indian philosophy and comparative religion. So this is a very brief bio note of Professor D.K. Mohanta. And now may I request him to start his lecture. Professor Mohanta, sir, please come to the podium.
ये इधर ही है, वो खाली वो पावर पॉइंट का ऑपरेट करना है। नमस्कार, thank you so much, Dr. Jadhav, for using some kind words. I think after listening to Professor Prasad, there is nothing new left for me here. And he has covered the historical part in details and also where lies the scope of interpretations. I have also a personal note. I remember those days in early 80s, my supervisor actually he gave me this book, said, "This is your Bible, this central philosophy of Buddhism, then how to write a thesis." You see, the notes of these books are extensive, and you will get guidance for further research. So I believe this is still a Bible to me. And I also give my students how to rather to do philosophy. And in the very preface, he mentioned his mentor, Krishna Chandra Bhattacharya. Anyway, kindly excuse me, I started writing paper, but only one pages I could write, only one page, and then somehow I could not manage. I was hesitant how to come. Then somehow my research scholar rescued me. I was telling her the points and they presented it. I am not a techno-savvy person like my elder brother, Professor Prasad is. So somehow I'm taking help from, I'm rather interdependent. I believe in the philosophy of interdependence. So getting help from different persons, somehow something is there. I know it's the presentations is online also. Some of our good friends are there. I'm standing before you, not that I know Nagarjuna's philosophy better than others, but because the way I have tried to understand whether this is the correct way or not. You all have, to me, the mirrors. Especially in Indian philosophy, what is Purva Paksha, we give much more importance. And this is, in fact, a very essential part of our cultural democracy. So far, we used to see, as also very rightly mentioned by Professor Prasad, that the very beginning of the 20th century, or at the end of 19th century, because what Europe is doing, we are to follow. But subsequently, the beginning of 20th century and later on, some very few people in academia started seeing things from Indian lens also. And this is very important in respect to our 75th years of political independence. So I have been working from this perspective only. And Murti is a classic example. I had the good fortune of getting the acquaintance of some dominant teachers of philosophy in my student life. One was Professor Kalidas Bhattacharya. He was living in Shantiniketan those days after retirement, and I was a student, and also Professor Bimal Krishna Motilal. Both of them, actually, I was a student of logic, mathematical logic, and both of them influenced me to see the treasure house in Indian philosophy. So, sorry. Philosophy to me deals with ideas, but it is not a museum of ideas, because a museum is storehouse of dead and finished things. But philosophy deals with living ideas. It is not a mere description of past thinkers' ideas. In every stage, as it deviates from the past, in a sense of repetition or orthodoxy. Orthodoxy is very dangerous. An orthodox refuses to learn. But philosophy is a subject open-ended, starting in the Vedas. If we go through Rig Veda, there is a mantra, Anu Badra Kratabu Yantu Vishwataha. Let noble thoughts come to us from different directions. I consider it is a very incentive mantra for all the researchers, not only for the philosophy researchers. And in doing research, what we do, we create, then it creates itself with freshness through its claim to enjoy freedom from the past. We inherit the past. We do not stop with the past. We must claim freedom from the past also. Therefore, deviation and counterpositions are as essential as the inheritance of the past. And this characterizes the contemporary Indian philosophers, starting with, academic philosophers, K.C. Bhattacharya, Murti, Kalidas Bhattacharya, and others. It is said that history of philosophy started by a philosopher's responsive and reactive mind turns into philosophy of the history. T.R.V. Murti records his obligation to K.C. Bhattacharya for his methodological approach to Madhyamika philosophy. K.C. Bhattacharya understands philosophy as a critical reflection. His writings are very terse, as mentioned, but I heard my teacher, Professor Kalyan Kumar Bakchi, is above 90. His mother was a direct student of K.C. Bhattacharya. And the class, he was very lucid. Only one article he has written in lucid manner, this is Rajin Ideas. It was actually delivered in lectures and there are some noted points. Fortunately or unfortunately, I had to do some works. I edited the unpublished Bangla manuscript he wrote, that is an essay on Bhagavad Gita Vichar, published from Calcutta, and during lockdown, and within 1 year it is finished. So my English, I was especially by my friend Professor Ambika Datta Sharma and Sachidanand Mishraji requested me to convert into English. Then I translated into English and lying with ICPR for publication. According to K.C. Bhattacharya, it is in philosophy, if anywhere, the task of discovering the soul of India is imperative of modern Indian. The task of achieving, if possible, for continuity of this old self with the present day self. It's a very technical word. He said it in his Swarajin Ideas. If it has any, he said, genius can unveil the soul of India in art, but it is through philosophy that we can methodically attempt to discover the soul of India. And same happened to Bipin Chandra Pal. Very name of the book is Soul of India, 1911. You will see. This book is available in online also. This is in Google's Meet, free of cost. A philosopher for Bhattacharya is a wise person who never gives any impression that the perennial nature of philosophic question has been solved by him. There is no final answer to philosophy. All answers are ad hoc answers. There are questions. So it is more important to raise a question than to give an answer in philosophy. It is not our burden to give the solutions like a scientist. A philosopher is a, you see, philosophizing, therefore, is an activity of freedom in thinking. If we want to unfold our freedom in a philosophic enterprise, we have to do it how? Within a context laid down by the preceding generations. So we are also there is inheritance, keeping in mind the changing needs of the time. Bhattacharya, according to Bhattacharya, a true philosophic system is not to be looked upon as a soulless jointing of hypotheses. It is a living fabric which, with all its endeavors to be objective, and must have well-marked individuality, unquote. Philosophical method is one of, therefore, hermeneutical exercise through which an entire system of thought flashes anew before one's mind's eye, as we can read it in Professor T.R.V. Murti's interpretations of Madhyamika philosophy. It is different from what we call in Indian vernacular stutrapato. A philosopher is to be open-ended. It is not necessary to believe that the philosophical texts are infallible or bhranto. It is not necessary to believe. You can question each and everybody. And also, a question is there to read an author simply in order to refute him is not the proper way to understand him. So understanding is also very important. Philosophers quarrel. They seldom differ. More they quarrel, engage in debate and discussions, the more they differ, more their friendship becomes closer. There's something very interesting about philosophers. See, Ambikaji, we quarrel too much over telephone. If he writes something, he sent it to me. Dada, ye dekh lijiye. Son, we differ most of the times. It does not mean that physically we are quarreling, because this refreshing. We refresh our minds. So refreshment is very important. Here I am refreshing my personal friendship with many of my friends here, and also I'm trying to make new friendship, with those who are especially youngers. I'm very grateful to this department for giving me this opportunity to refresh my old friendship and giving me an opportunity to make new friendship with you. I hope it will continue. So, if we follow them without reflection, without examining them, as said by Buddha, pariksha madvacha gracham bhikshave. Pariksha madvacha gracham. It is to be accepted after proper examination, not to gauravan, not just out of sheer reverence to me. This is the stand of the philosopher. If we accept it just like the recitation of hymns or stutrapato, then it will only add toward dogmatism and arrogance, which may then end up as fanaticism, bigotry, and conflict. Therefore, Bhattacharya says, because of Western model of education and thinking, which nowadays is called colonial hangover, genuine Indian mind is yet to be developed. We are to come out of this. I quote him, there is nothing like a judgment on Western systems from the standpoint of Indian philosophy, as also referred in the morning sessions by Professor Prasad. And although some appraisement of Indian philosophy has been attempted from the Western standpoint, there appears to be no recognition yet that a criticism of fundamental notions of either philosophy is necessary before there can be any useful comparative estimate. Be that as it may, in interpretation, we should have constructive interpretation. Any philosophical reflection is a hermeneutical exercise through which an entire system of thought flashes anew before one's mind's eye. No constructive philosophy in modern India can thrive unless one has studied both Western and old Indian philosophy and tried to revive old Indian thoughts through modern acceptable idioms as far as possible, and then develop lines of divergence which fortunately or unfortunately are plentiful. This general standpoint characterizes T.R.V. Murti's exposition of Madhyamika philosophy. He said, I'm quoting him from the preface, in philosophy, difference of interpretations is legitimate, Murti claimed, and should have been should even be welcome, unquote. This is Murti's statement. Murti has examined some possible objections against Nagarjuna. There are many objections. Mula Madhyamaka Karika, people say it is better not to read it. If you just translate it word by word, everything will be misinterpretations. That's why Nagarjuna himself has written two small treatises long back. I did some works on Sunata Saptati and Vigraha Vyavartani. And you will have no Mangalacharanas starting with these books. So original work is Mula Madhyamaka Karika. So he has replied these critics there, Nagarjuna himself. I do not know, perhaps this Sunnata Saptati was not available to Murti in this present form, but he presumed this. This is the intellect, text is not there, but and in his interpretation also, so this interpretation is very constructive interpretation, Murti's interpretations. You may agree, you may not agree, but I find last 40 years it is very difficult to just escape from the net of T.R.V. Murti. Sometimes I find that I understand him, but afterwards I see, no, there are some subtle hints. So the more important in this book is, text is important, but the notes are more important, I find. For example, I'm giving one. Is criticism possible without holding any position? This is Murti put in his book. He asked. And his conclusion is this: to criticize a position, it is not only unnecessary, but irrelevant to advance another position. So, philosophical opponents of Nagarjuna always tried to criticize him in a wrong way. He was perhaps a philosopher, what is called in literature, more sinned than sinning. Totally confused, misunderstood, and in our college days, there was a question in Calcutta University, does it preach nihilism? So it's a nihilistic philosophy. Nihilistic philosophy. And much, attention had not given to the original implications of this philosophy. With this introductory remark, I pay my homage to the great legendary philosophers of our country, K.C. Bhattacharya and T.R.V. Murti, with an examination of a common theme in Nagarjuna's philosophy. Again, it is said Nagarjuna's philosophy is deconstructive in its approach. If you read these portions of the book, you will get this line. deconstructionistic in its approach and nihilistic in orientation. Murti agrees with the first and disagrees with the second. I agree with Murti on the second and do disagree with Murti on the first. To me, the methodological approach of Nagarjuna is rather deconditioning rather than deconstruction, as we understand in postmodern sense. I express my sincere gratitude and thanks to my friends in the Department of Philosophy and Religion, Benares Hindu University, for giving me an opportunity to share my humble understanding of an aspect of Nagarjuna's philosophy today. I'm quite happy that seeing all these Saturday lectures, sometimes when I get times I try to attend, that this department is now reviving the past glory. It's a very optimistic position of our subject, especially at a time where everywhere the departments of philosophy government is interested to close down. Tripura government closed teaching philosophy in schools. So they are converting all the posts. Our colleagues are now formed an organization. In South, it is stopped, no student. Only in Eastern region it is leaving, but at least in BHU, it is our responsibility to recreate it. This is another kind of reconstructions. And unless we do this, we don't have any position in the world. Nowadays, especially in Europe, there is special interest for classical Indian philosophy. But it is our duty to present it in the academically edible language. Anyway, now let me start with the examination. The second part of the lecture is that a special theme of this examination. Vigraha Vivartani, there are verse number, Karika number 29. It is said, Yadi Kachan Pratigga San me bhavet dosam Nasti cha mama pratigga naivasti cha me dosam. I don't have any thesis to put forward. Therefore, you cannot accuse me of any blemish, any defects. My task is only to refute the wrong philosophies, the claims, absolute claims. Because, as in the morning, Professor Prasad was referring to Drishti, Drishtivada. This is dogmatism. So Nagarjuna was accused of self-contradiction, self-referring, all these accusations. Another fundamental work, I have translated this in Bangla, Pratitya Samutpado Hridaya Karika. These 7 verses one must begin, because the early Buddhist approach and the later Buddhist approach are little bit different. So this is the basic things. The one text, Mula Madhyama Karika, Vigraha Vivartani, Shunyata Saptati, Yukti Shashtika. These are the main philosophic texts, mainly devoted to this dialectical approach to philosophy. And there are many commentaries, and now this Raghunath Pandey edited this, but there are some mistakes also. I have been trying to reconstruct it again from Tibetan sources. There are some mistakes are there. So all the commentaries should be available together. In R.N. Pandey's book, it is there. Without reading this commentary, it's very difficult to enter into Nagarjuna. It's a philosophy of possibility, so much possibility. Professor Prasad refers to ethics also. And I think tomorrow, Professor Datta Sharma will try to show it as a basis for world culture. And I do agree with this. I'm not going to deal with this only by, it is very limited here with the epistemological part. So, if we read all these texts, I found maximum there are 4 places where we can raise this objection. Self-referring. So Nita Saptaji started with this. If Sarvam Sundam, Sarvab Sundam is, it involves self-contradictions. Then again, Vigraha Vyavartani, I'm sorry. Is no thesis a thesis? Nastita mama pratigga. Is it a thesis? If a philosopher doesn't have any thesis, then what is the value of philosophy? Is he a mad person? Is no position? He said, I don't have any position. Murti said, is philosophical analysis or criticism possible without holding any position, without recognizing any pramanas? You know, in Vigraha Vyavartani from Karika number 31 to 51, there is an refutation of pramanas, validity of pramana. Same happened to there from Karika number, 4 to 20 in Vaidalya Sutra. Long back I annotated, elucidated Vaidalya Sutra published from Advanced Center of Philosophy, Utkal University is no more available in market. And they're not giving me also permission to. There is no fundamental difference in the arguments. So there also, whether is no thesis a thesis, this is something where we can see the acquisition of self-referring or self-contradiction. Is it established by any pramana? So he questioned pramana itself in Vigraha Vyavartani and Vaidalya Sutra. Now, another is, Professor Prasad was also referring in the morning, the fundamental thing is nishshavavata. He said sunya means nishshavava, devoid of intrinsic nature. Okay? Does everything is devoid of intrinsic nature make morality and Buddha Vachana irrelevant? So this is a very strong argument that he is accused of a papi as a papi bhikkhu, a sinner monk, because he is, interpreting Buddha Vachana. So from verse number 54 to 57, he dealt with this in Vigraha Vyavartani. Recently, I have written an article on these 4 verses. Is it the fact that he really denied any distinction between what is moral and what is immoral? Now, I'm putting this as a minimum possible cases. So one is there is no thesis of mind. Another is all things are emptied of intrinsic nature. But all these, propositions are interconnected, very fundamentally connected to another logical position. It is law of excluded middle. And we know this Chatuskuti Vinirmukta position, the last 4th one is the denial of the law of excluded middle, which are really the classical logicians are so fond of this. The sacred, and they consider it as a sacred principle, sacrosanct principles. The denial of the law of excluded middle in the charge of contradiction. So any kind of examination or interpretation of Nagarjuna cannot go without touching the explanations of law of excluded middle, especially Nagarjuna on negation. Long back I wrote a paper published from Europe and translated into many languages. Somehow this paper actually introduced me to the Western world. This simple paper is Nagarjuna on negation. So concept of negation, pratisayadaha, is very important to a logician. We can build up a system with this. And again, we see starting in modern logic, we deal with two operators, necessity and possibility. Nowadays, people started doing, especially the Graham Priest and others, we meet several times, that he's trying to see some paraconsistent germination points of paraconsistent logic here. I don't know, I'm not an expert on that. But whatever is there in the text, I can tell you in plain language. But everybody admits there are some necessity in the practical world. And if your understanding, if your logic cannot help you how to live in the practical world successfully, then that logic has no value. And in that way, the concept of modality is very important here. And if you emphasize the concept of modality, immediately the sacrosanct principle of law of excluded middle would be subject to, refutation. And Nagarjuna, in fact, did it. If you read Murti's interpretations, you will see he was not only one versed in Vedanta and Madhyamika, but in Johnson's logic, how much he used there, the logic. So, in that way, I feel that I can pay my homage to Professor Murti. And also, to pay my debt to this department, because my younger brother, Misraji, invited me to be here. I was frightened because I did not get time to write something. Without writing a paper, it is not good to come to any seminar. So in a hurried way, sometimes I'll explain the point. Now I'm come to what I'm trying to examine only one issue, that is, there is no thesis of mind. This is there from Vigraha Vyavartani. Now I consider it as A. From A follows the rest. Now A1 is, there is no thesis of mind, is a thesis. So no thesis is a thesis. From this follows, there is at least one thesis of mind. That is no thesis of mind within quote and unquote. I am presenting the Purva Paksha. Now, from this follows, no thesis is a thesis. Then comes A4. To get a thesis is to get a thesis. Now A5 follows necessarily, that is, there is a thesis of mind, namely there is no thesis of mind. So it involves contradiction, especially the Naiyayikas. Naiyayikas, point by point refutations of Nyaya Sutra we see in Vaidalya Sutra. Am I right, sir? Vaidalya Sutra. Point by point. But when Vatsayana replied it later on, by this time Nagarjuna was not alive, I think. So it is the task of the later Buddhist philosopher, other philosophers to look for an possible reply. Philosophy in our country, bade, through these discussions, refutations, counter refutations, develops. Now I am examining this chart. There would be a self-refutation if it were possible to arrive at A2. What is this? There is at least one thesis of mind. So when we say at least one existential propositions from A through A1, A1 is there is no thesis of mind, is a thesis. Now, but the status of A1 is, to my mind, is nonsensical. It does not have any meaningful meaning in our communication. When someone says, suppose I have nothing to give, it does not certainly mean nothing is something, nothing is equal to something in any meaningful communication. In other words, to equate nothing with something is nonsensical. I'm giving you an example. We all teachers. Professor Prasadji has recently retired. But he is not tired at all, you have seen in the morning. And I'm not well aware of the students of PHU, but in Calcutta, we admit 264 students in one semester with 2 sections. And when you enter the class, you will see, oh, machli ka bazaar ban jata hai. Students, they are fond of talking, and teacher says, stop, or no sound, please. Immediately stops. Otherwise, you can have this rule called even nothing. So, students are using these sounds, because if sometimes in between 2 classes, I go little bit 10 minutes later, not immediately. If one teacher leaves, they should have the breathing time, students, I remember my university days, many things. In those days, there are many bad habits of the students. We used to enjoy something else also, but they talk. So when I say no sound or stops, immediately stops. Now, when being asked by somebody, say there is nobody. Suppose in a room, Thomas Hardy's poem, Listener. Is there anybody there? There is no reply. So when I ask if there is an empty room here, so Professor Anandji in front of the door, head of the department, the most powerful persons in our system. He is called head. We all are tails. So he would say, no. Is there Professor Tiwari? Is there anybody there? He says, no. There is nobody. What does it mean? Should I mean that nobody, does nobody mean somebody in incommunicable sense? Certainly not. Therefore, to admit A3, no thesis is thesis, does not carry any sense. As to admit nobody is somebody. Therefore, no thesis is equal to a thesis is nonsensical. So charge is nonsensical. Nonsensical approach. Why? It is there in the text itself. I'm just interpreting the text since the lecture is devoted on Kesi Bhattacharya, Murti, and Nagarjuna. A comment by Chandrakirti in the context of nonsensical and dogmatic reasoning. You will get it in Sanskara Pariksha. This is chapter Sanskara Trayodasha Prakarana, chapter 13, Karika number 8. There is a Prasanna Pada, means britti, clear words. One of my Italian friends translated Prasanna Pada first chapter, Cesare Rizzi. I think I don't know whether he is alive or not, but he has done very good works, Cesare Rizzi. Suppose a person P asks another person Q for something, and in reply Q says, sorry, I have nothing to give. Now P again asks, give that nothing. Bhikshang dehi me. Then he said, then give that nothing. He said, I have nothing to give you bhiksha. A bhikkhu comes. He said, no, just give that nothing. Here, like a mad person, P is asking nonsensically. So what we say should carry sense, not only reference. This is not said first by Frege. Frege is popular, but it's said here long back in 1st century AD. Because P thinks nothing as something. Here lies the fault in thinking. There are many good things in our traditions. My point is I'm emphasizing on this, especially our younger friends, that you try to see what is there inside our traditions. It is not else negligible as we are taught by our European friends or suffering from we are colonial hangover. We have to come out. This is in fact the actual independence. We got political independence in 1947, but we are not free. This is the real meaning of independence or freedom, is freedom in ideas. So it shows that the charge of self-refuting against Nagarjuna is nonsensical. Now, what is the significance of this? There is a profound philosophical significance that may be emerged from what Nagarjuna has said in Karika number 29 in Vigraha Vyavartani. In understanding philosophy of language, I promise if I get time, I shall develop it into a paper. Only I am narrating the points, and the language Nagarjuna is used is not a language used for describing objects of the world, but a language about the language we use for describing. I refer a book, a small lecture delivered by Professor A.K. Chatterjee in my former institution, Sanskrit College, Thesis of Buddhist Thought. Earlier it was 10 rupees available. Now I think during my vice chancellorship, I revived the publications. I don't know whether the present vice chancellor is a physics professor. I don't know whether she is interested, but those who have, you must read A.K. Chatterjee, Ashok Kumar Chatterjee of BHU. He delivered a lecture. So wonderful lectures. And it is a meta language upon which the limits of ordinary language, with its all descriptive fragments, that is, the limits of object language, can be conceived. So, on philosophy of language, also, if we want, we can develop, rather, there is a constructive criticism. So, you can develop basing on the insights hidden in Nagarjuna's philosophy. Why then the charge comes? The charge occurs from the failure of understanding the nature and functioning of language by his philosophical opponents. Here I must say the philosophical opponents were not that they could not understand, but they ignored. Suppose I do not like you. In Bangla we say, the person, a dancer, I don't like that person, then I would say, oh, okay, dance is good, but charan baka. In philosophy, if you read very closely the debate between Nayayikas and others, Nayayikas are dhurandaras. I know there are many Nayayikas here. Banaras is I'm not seeing this Sachidanand Misra, sometimes we quarrel. The Nayayikas dhurandara. And Jarasi Bhatta said, they are Rajabritta. They are the paid intellectuals of the king, the administration, the Nayayikas. They have supplied enough argument to support the power people, those who are in power. And this is not the proper stand for a philosopher. It is neither left nor right but straight. Narrow is the land. Straight is the way, narrow is the land that leadeth unto truth. This is the goal of a philosopher. In fact, we cannot deny that language functions at different levels. This point has also been emphasized by Professor Prasad in the morning. I said different orders. And Nagarjuna, not directly, but indirectly refers to this rule of language while giving rejoinder to his critics. But in Vigraha Vyavartani, there is Vritti. Vritti were not available in those days. This Vritti, 23, 24, 25, and the first verse of Sunnata Saptati. Professor D.P. Chattopadhyay in one lecture. Actually, what happened, I never met him. Somehow he came to know about me. He asked me to meet him. He referred this. He has good interpretations also. This, the first verse. of Sunyata Saptati. Why? And many of our European friends commented on this, wrote something, this Sunyata Saptati. In those days, Doyaji was editing GICPR. Then he asked me to write something. In Sankhya, Karika, how many verses are there, sutras are there? They said there are some, interpolations are there. But this is not true. So Dagunitri and others interpretations, there is a rejoinder. Doyaji asked me to write, and I wrote in those days, published in GICPR. So this vrittis, swavrittis are very important, just like Okuta Bhayotika. I'm just referring only to this so that one can develop this in future. Suppose, as I mentioned, the teacher's case sound, here teacher himself makes a sound, that very sound prevents other from making sounds in the class. There are two different aspects of the very statement. One is negator and other is the negatum. For example, when as a consequence of a teacher's sound, don't make sound in the class. Stop such type of sound. It is also sound. The whole class becomes silent. The very purpose of the second order of sound is being fulfilled, because teacher wanted that should be silence in the class. He should only be the speaker. So he is also using language, making sound. The need of functioning of that is also being over when it successfully stops the first orders of sound in the said class. Like this Nagarjuna statement, Nasti cha mama pratigga, is not a self-referring statement. Rather, it is a statement of second order, and therefore there is nothing to be worried about to admit the very statement as emptied of intrinsic nature, when all false views, all drishtis about reality are being refuted by it. When the sky, sun is overshadowed by cloud, when the clouds are over, you do not need to be told to see this is the sun. Therefore, the philosophers, through interpretation, in fact, distorted reality. His purpose is to clear the path. As I said, straight is the way, narrow is the lane that leadeth unto truth. Therefore, Nagarjuna's statement is to be understood with reference to the question he tries to answer. No statement about any language can be a member of the same order of language. As we see in deductive system, P and not P, the closed system, cannot be a thesis. So we should not suffer from consistency phobia. Nagarjuna presented us a logic free from consistency phobia. In our daily life, we involve in contradiction, we quarrel with each other. We work on fuzzy, gray areas. And the more you are successful there, the more you are successful in life. So the very, as B and Shield said, there are, statistical generalizations. The word statistics, this is the germinating point in Nagarjuna's. So he said he is the best logician India ever produced, about Nagarjuna. Nagarjuna negates different possibilities separately in different senses. Now, his dialectic. Now, Murti says, elaborate discussion on dialectics, which is originally in Sanskrit called prasanga. His dialectics aims at showing inner contradiction in opponents' thesis. Nayayiko, to them, bhavo and abhavo, these are the maximum possibilities. One excludes other. Therefore, they said there is nothing. There is excluded middle. The middle excludes the two, bifurcation. The Buddhist cannot accept it, and Nagarjuna never. Therefore, this enables him to negate any thesis without advancing any thesis of his own. I'm referring to Prasannapada again. This is Sanskara Porikka. Chandrakirti refers to an observation reported to be made by Buddha to Kashyapa about Sunnata Drishti. Taking emptiness as another metaphysical theory vanishes all hopes for a person to get rid of his delusion. Now, I'm giving another metaphor from there. It is well known. I'm quoting it from Raz David's translations. Suppose someone is sick, the doctor gives some medicinal herb to him, and that medicinal herb, after removing all other defects in the system, does not get out of the system. What do you think? Kasyapa, will that person be relieved of sickness? Certainly not. Oh, honorable one. So it very happens, the doctors, especially the surgeon friends, sometimes they forget to take something out from the inside the body, and way of this the patient suffers more. Sometimes it happens in medical treatment. That is why it is called incurable sickness. If that medicinal herb, after removing all defects of the system, does not itself get out of the system, then the person will be more sick. The honorable one said, in this manner, O Kashyapa, emptiness is the means of getting out of all views. But if someone takes emptiness to be a view, I call him to be incurable. All these are interconnected, rather grounded on a very strong logic of negation. Logical systems are built on, negation. Without negation, no logical system can be built up. In Nagarjuna's philosophy also, we use negation is integrally connected with the refutation of 4 different possible patterns called kotis in Sanskrit, by which usually philosophical theories are being built up. These are bhavo, abhavo, bhava, bhavo, and no bhavo, naiva bhavo. I use some propositional terms for easy understanding. P, not P, negation P, P and not P, P or not P, very loosely here. The philosophers who believe in two-valued logic use propositional negation or relational negation. Suppose it is true that it is raining in the outside, then, or it is raining in the outside is false. Then, immediately I would ask you, see whether the outside is raining or not. You will immediately tell me, no sir, it is not raining. So, it is not the case that it is raining in the outside. So, I am denying this. By denial, I am accepting the other as true. This has happened with relational negations. There is a good term in Indian tradition. I am telling you, Payudasa Pratisada. And this is nothing but these relational negations. So in logic also, the Indian philosophy can supply you some tools which can be used even by the others all over the world. Our tradition was so rich. Philosophers who believe in two-valued logic, it is called relational negation. The user of this type of negation believe that the world is exhaustively divided into 2 absolute categories of object. One is positive, the other is the negation of the former. Two-valued logic has been championed by the Gautama and other realistic schools of Indian philosophy. If somebody is not here, if there are only two possibilities, somebody is either here, Professor Anand Misraji, it is possible he's either in this lecture or he is in the office of the head of the department. If he is not here, then you are sure that you'll get him there if possibility is fixed between the two. And now somebody goes to his chamber, you see he is not there, then immediately you assume that he is in the lecture hall and he is here. Suppose this, but can you think of the world in this deterministic way? The future logic seldom remain unprogrammed. We do not know what will happen next day. Full of uncertainty. Everything in epistemology, according to those philosophers, is therefore either true or false. In metaphysics, either real or unreal. If something is true, is meant by P, then it is not the case that something is not true would be meant by negation P. And this is very exclusive sense. They accept P and not P are mutually exclusive and understand the statement P exists as P exists unconditionally in absolute sense. So they understand not P as P does not exist also in absolute sense. And this is very dangerous. The extremists throughout the world are using this. They don't believe in pluralism. They don't believe in otherness. The concept of other is a very important concept. Nowadays, people are using in social sciences also. But the very basis of this is the philosophical concept of other. To them, what is real in unconditional real and what is called unreal is unconditionally absolutely unreal. And any conjunction of P and not P is an explicit contradiction. If you have a deterministic system of deductive system, what are the characteristics of the deductive system? If it involves P as a theorem and not P as a theorem, then this system involves contradictions. A logician should fear it. Consistency phobia is there in deterministic logic. You can use deduction, but that will not help you too much in your practical world. Now I said the LEM means law of excluded middle, as very elaborately discussed by Murti. He introduced Johnson's logic there. If you read very closely, you will find how much he himself trained. He trained himself in those days available logic. In order to avoid the contradiction, they accept the law of excluded middle as necessary. The concept of necessity, we read in logic, there is eliminations, mechanism of eliminations as taught by von Riet in his book, Logical Problems of Induction. You see, there is a chapter 5. This is the mechanism of eliminations. And also, this is applied in Nagel's book, Logical Structure of Science. Very interesting book in our student as we read it. I think Dr. Jadhav is teaching here, I heard this Nagel's book. There are two kinds of necessity. One is universal necessity and another is nomic necessity. For them, P and not P cannot be negated, and they claim that P or not P can explain the world in an exhaustive way. Bahut acha. As a corollary, then they accept double negations. All Nayayikos accept, new Nayayikos they don't accept. As a valid principle of reasoning. Therefore, I say for Nagarjuna, this not P is equal to P is also to be refuted. So double negation is not acceptable to Nagarjuna. In fact, for presenting Nagarjuna, we should use the modal concept of necessity and possibility. You can develop this. 4 quotes, the possible ways of understanding what is real. How much time is left? Already I have spoken for more than 40 minutes. Should I continue? The possible ways of understanding what is real, it is said by some Indian philosophers that regarding causal relation, the first quote is say P represents the Sankhya view. The second one, negation P represents the Nyaya view. And the third view, P and not P represents Jain view. And the fourth represents Charvaka view. And very good discussions are there in Jayadev Singh's introductions. Very good book, Jayadev Singh's. However, there are philosophers who have questioned the above classification of the views. The four quote is the denial of P presupposes the acceptance of not P as valid theorem. P or not P cannot be negated. This is their argument. If we deny P or not P, we will get P and not P as valid theorem. You deny P or not P, you will arrive at P and not P. A clear case of contradictions in indirect proof you would do in Copy's logic, you will see. This is an explicit case of contradictions. So, law of excluded middle cannot be denied in nominally bound predicate logic or in relational logic as of Nyaya. I said Nyaya. Please excuse me, I could not put all these diacritic marks here. There are four corners in the table you see. A1 and B2 are contradictions according to the traditional logicians, those who apply two-valued logic. And a T3 with T4, there is contradictions. Now, the consistency phobia discharge. But no philosopher who believes in relational negation can negate T4, that is law of excluded middle. This would be clear if we compare the following two cases. A in the right side and the B in the left side. A in the right side and B in the left side. This one. Say A represents T3 and the negation of T3 leads to the acceptance of T4. Again, B represents T4 and the negation of B leads to the acceptance of T3. But no consistent philosopher can accept T3 as a thesis. Therefore, it is not possible to negate both T3 and T4. This completes the Purva Paksha. I have presented the objections logically. Now, I am calling them phobia. Ohati ko bhiti. Consistency phobia free logic Nagarjuna is giving. But Nagarjuna negates all this possible four. We must have to assume that he uses negation in a different sense. To him, truth values cannot be necessarily confined to two. But Brajendranath Shil said, this many-dimensional world. There can be more dimensions, and people say this is the germination points of even he used to many-valued logic. There are two papers published in Journal of Mathematics in 1890, and another is 1910, B. N. Shil's. This is on mathematics. To him, truth values cannot be necessarily confined to two. His use of negation is known as four-cornered negation, Chatushkuti, Vinimukta position, among the interpreters of Indian philosophy. He would rather believe in many-valued logic. How many? Maybe. We cannot claim in absolute terms. This is another fuzzy areas. So, Swabhava. Now, T1, since everything is conditionally originated, Pratitta Samutpanna, nothing can be said to have self-nature. Nishshabhavata means Pratitta Samutpannata. Everything is essenceless. So, a philosophy, a non-essentialistic philosophy is there. Essence does not precede your existence. This is the motto. These Buddhists, they're pragmatists, in a sense, they're existentialist. When we say that P exists, we do not mean that P exists unconditionally, because it cannot be explained without the notion of negation P. What is essentially unconditionally existent cannot have the origination, and that which has no origination cannot have destruction. In other words, a thing with self-nature can neither have a beginning nor have an end. In this world, everything is devoid of self-nature. So there is no difficulty in negating the thesis P exists independently because it presupposes P, not P. Nothing exists unconditionally. Now I am giving a metaphor. The construction of negation P into T2, it can also be negated without any difficulty. Why? Because P is unreal in absolute sense. And this is also an extreme view. But our experience of the furniture of the world makes it clear that nothing in this world is categorically unreal. Parents, woman, child, banda, sutaha, rabbit son, sky flower, etc. are some of the classical examples of what is unconditionally real. We use this as a metaphor in our language. So if there is some word we use, it does not necessarily correspond to the objective meaning in reality. That is why they don't accept the existence of God. The Buddhists, they criticize the Naiyayikas. Nobody has given argument for God's existence like Naiyayikas, They needed some arguments to prove God's existence. And it was not at all a very essential concern for the Indian philosophers in other systems also. There are some arguments in yoga. What is evident here is that neither T1 or T2 is acceptable as an independent quoties. Now comes the question of Shashvatavada and Uchchedavada. If we admit that what is conditionally existing is as good as what is absolutely unreal, then there would be a context of admitting nihilism. But both eternalism and nihilism, Shashvatavada and Uchchedavada, are extreme theories. The world of conditional relative existence cannot be called fictitious. They are not adequate grounds for explaining something as unconditionally existent or unconditionally non-existent. What is evident here is that neither T1 or T2 is acceptable as independent quoties. As adequate grounds for explaining something as unconditionally existent or unconditionally non-existent. Since both T1 and T2 are, are meaningful depending on each other, both these are alternatives and they are devoid of any intrinsic nature, nishshabhava. So no extreme view is admissible. No, so the negation of negation P, like the negation of P, does not create any difficulty. It rather emphasizes that P represents eternalism and negation P represents nihilism. In a very loose way, I am using these symbols. And the nature of the world cannot be explained by any of these extreme views. P and not P both are defective interpretations and therefore unacceptable. So first two quotes are over. Now about P and not P, this is little bit tricky in a different sense. If you read the commentaries, it is Bhava Viveka's commentaries are also helpful here. Bhava Viveka we should read. And Sabritti Akhuta by a Tika. Now comes the considerations of the third alternative. In the relational logic, which is otherwise known as propositional logic, T3 can be true if and only if the following three conditions be fulfilled. I am referring these T conditions. If P and not P both are unconditionally true, both are having self-nature. Second possibility, if P and not P both are not contradictory to each other. And third possibility, if between P and not P there exists no common property even in the instances as said in the excluded middle. But the point is that none of the aforesaid conditions according to Nagarjuna is applicable in case of T3. In Mula Madhyamika Karika, there is one chapter 12, Dukkha Pariksha. Nagarjuna explicates that the conjunction of both self and not self can also be the cause of suffering. If in disconjoint positions, they can be the cause of suffering. If in disconjoint position they cause suffering, then in conjoint position they also they cause suffering. What seems to be evident is that T3 being a mechanical combination of the aforesaid two extreme views which are defective, T3 contains the defects of those two. They inherits the defects, and therefore, according to Nagarjuna, is to be refuted. Dr. asks sometimes, if you have sugar and others, you go, whether your parents do have, any of the parents have this disease. So sometimes you inherits the bad things also. Even in accordance with those who divide the world into two exclusive compartments of is and is not, T3 represents an explicit form of contradiction, and therefore it is to be rejected. To admit the categorical unconditional existence of something as well as non-existence of that thing simultaneously is to admit self-stultification. Let us again take help from Prasanna Pada. It is chapter 18, 3. But there seems to be a very specific sense in which T3 can be rejected, according to Nagarjuna. And Chandrakirti has elaborated in his clear words, Prasanna Pada. He hinted towards a new interpretations of T3. And if we keep in mind Chandrakirti's interpretation, we can apply negation without any difficulty, both T3 and T4. What is this? The denial of T3 is not equivalent to, therefore, T4. If you deny the so-called law of contradiction, it does not necessarily lead to arrive at law of excluded middle. The rejection of the law of excluded middle does not necessarily lead to accept to T3 or means contradiction. The law of contradiction. The denial of the law of contradiction does not necessarily lead to the acceptance of law of excluded middle as valid. And here is a text I mentioned, the Sanskrit. I'm skipping over the Sanskrit portions. I'm not interpreting the text of Chandrakirti in my own way. In T3, according to Chandrakirti's interpretation, P is true for a special class of individual. And negation P is true for a different class of individual. Vinaya Jayana Jnana Apekshaya. Arya Jana Jnana Apekshaya. Since the conditions are different, there is no difficulty even if we arrive at T3 by denying T4. And since T3 does not represent any categorical absolute sense of existence of either P or not P, it can safely be said that the conjunction of P and not P is also devoid of any its own nature, that is independent existence. It is also nishabhava. Therefore, very interesting, the law of excluded middle. Now it is to be seen how is it possible to deny P or not P. This is law of excluded middle. And the thesis is represented as T4. The T4 is the principle of excluded middle. Nagarjuna, not being a believer in any exclusive demarcation, in exclusive terms of the world into two halves, like Nayayikas, he rejects T4, and this rejection, as a matter of fact, according to him, does not lead to any contradiction. Take, for example, the application of the word red. Red color is very fun. People say, Bachpan mein I was very fond of this red color shirts and on this. Still I love. So my boy, sometimes he purchase something for me. Always he prefers red color, which is very difficult to wear when I am in a public place. When we say that something is red, we also admit that there exists something non-red. Presuppositions are there, which includes all colored objects other than the class of red. But if we mean only red and non-red objects, then the class of colorless objects would be left outside the scope of the colored objects, say red and non-red. Analogically, the text argues that all the furniture of the world cannot be judiciously be classified into two exclusive classes, being eternal and non-eternal. And this is the text in chapter Drishti Porikka, details his text. We cannot say that eternal and non-eternal, etc., as independent quoties, alternatives are established. The meaning of one is always relative to the grasping of the meaning of the other. A child of a barren woman cannot be classified either as eternal or non-eternal. Our experiential data questions us that there is no sufficient ground to classify the world in a clear and distinct way in absolute terms. In other words, all objects of the world do have relative conditional existence. It is also called functional existence, Vyavaharika Sakta. Always there is the principle of interdependence, conditionality, operating in the actual world of our experience, and on the basis of these, only we can explain the fact of arising subsistence and destructions. So, in actual world, there is no fruitful application of the principle of excluded middle. We are turning towards common sense philosophy also. We cannot deny that there are borderline cases like colorless objects or fictitious class of objects for the explanations of which the law of excluded middle is not only inadequate but also not necessary. So, which is neither adequate nor necessary. Why should we hanker for that things, What will happen after your death, whether you will enjoy Sarga or you in Narak? Why you are so much fond of this? Try to see what is happening before you here in this world. It is therefore not necessary, because the denial of this does not lead to any contradiction, as we have seen in Chandrakirti's interpretations. The relational logic, in relational logic, though this P or not P is valid, but not valid in the non-relational logic, which denies that all possibilities within the universe of discourse is exhaustive. In other words, the law of excluded middle is not acceptable to the logic to which Nagarjuna would subscribe. I am referring again from Drishti Purikadis. In case the application of negation, in case of contradiction, the problem is how to make sense of what is denied. But in case of law of excluded middle, our concern is how the denial can make sense. See the difference. So there is no contradiction. You should be phobia free. This interpretation can be defended from following Chandrakirti, again from chapter 18 to 8. I am escaping this. Now I am presenting it in a very your known language. P, K is P or not P. This is the statement, it's a proposition. In this instance, there is no use of words like is or is not, etc. in absolute sense. In other words, the meaningful use of these words is actual world can be seen in conditional or relative sense. Even in P or not P, there are indistinct fuzzy areas about which no absolute claim can be made. And therefore, T4 for this reason does not convey any sense of necessary truth. If it is not necessary, you can deny it. Now, there is no guarantee that all objects of the world belonging either to green or not green classes. That is to say, the class of colorless object does not belong to either of these two. For a comprehensive explanation of the world, the law of excluded middle is thus neither necessary nor sufficient. Now, what it is then? What kind of negation he is subscribing to? From this, it is evident that we cannot say that the negation used by Nagarjuna represents the single pattern of alternatives. Rather, it includes a variety of patterns which differ from each other. Since negation of law of excluded middle does not invite any contradiction, as we have earlier said in our interpretation, we yet to understand that the law of double negation would not be valid to Nagarjuna. Always there is a principle of interdependence and conditionality operating in the actual world of our experience. And on the basis of this only, we can explain the fact of arising subsistence and destruction. Utpatti, Sthiti and Laya. So in actual world, there is no fruitful application of the principle of this is excluded middle, the very sacrosanct principle of the so-called logicians. We can't deny that there are borderline cases, the colorless objects or fictitious class of objects. So what is to be done? It is not necessary, because the denial of this does not lead to any contradiction, as we have seen in Chandrakirti's. In relational logic, though, is valid, but not valid in the non-relational logic. I explained this. Now, fuzzy border cases, this also I explained. So both T3 and T4 are possible. In other words, it is meaningless. It is nonsense to say that it is the combinations of two defective principles. We also explained this. Now, two different senses, that two need different concepts to explain how they can be rejected. Shows that the two rejections, even when regarded as negations, cannot be contradictory. It is only by ignoring how Nagarjuna has actually argued for the rejection of these two positions in different places that puzzlement over his theory can arise. His denial of T3 and T4 in two different senses showed that, like two valued logicians, he does not accept the principle of negation of negation. Nagarjuna's use of negation is pure negation, simple negation. What we can see then, any thesis, whatever, if it is put before him, he would reject it without commitment to the counter thesis. Therefore, Nagarjuna negates different possibilities separately in different senses. For him, the world is not exhaustively divided into two absolute categories, is and is not. So there is a question comes, is it Torko? Many times my friends ask me, Torko is also a kind of negation. I said no. Nagarjuna's dialectics aims at showing inner contradiction in opponent thesis, and this enables him to negate any thesis without advancing any thesis of his own. Here lies the difference between Nagarjuna's dialectics and the Nyaya method of Torko. The Nyaya describes the fifth type of Torko as Tadanna Badi Tartha Prasangaha. In Nyaya use of Tarka, there are two alternative possibilities, absolute possibilities, and the denial of one indirectly establishes the other. Therefore, although they use the term prasanga, the Nyayikas, Nagarjuna prasanga is different. So the same terms they have been used. Now, as I said, there are much controversy about Nagarjuna's describing Nagarjuna's dialectics as Derrida's deconstruction. Derrida and Nagarjuna, many works are coming out, especially the Coward, Professor Coward and others. I humbly disagree. This also presupposes an exhaustive and sharp conceptual definitions of the actual state of affairs. But since in actual state of affairs, concepts cannot be sharply defined and divided into two alternatives in absolute sense, in the sense of only two possibilities, Nagarjuna's methodology cannot subscribe to this. His use of prasanga is the rejection of all possible views about reality or the descriptions about the world. It is an attempt of deconditioning, such as I referred, the sky is over, there is cloud, you can't see the sun. It does not mean sun is not there. You are not asserting when the cloud is over, you do not need anybody to tell you this is the sun. Rather than it is deconstructing. It is rather, I say it is deconditioning. His negation of four alternatives, it is a commitmentless denial. And then anyway, it's a pure negation. Now there is Yukti Shastika Karika, 60 verses of reasoning. There it is very beautifully said, the great individuals hold no theories and are without disputes. How can there be a counter thesis for those who do not have a thesis? When one assumes any position or thesis, one is destroyed by the deceitful poisonous snake of the afflictions. Those individuals whose minds lack any position or thesis will not be destroyed. And our judgments are never free from obscurity and uncertainty. Law of excluded middle is based on the assumption that the judgment about the world is either true or false. There can be two exclusive categories. All absolute knowledge claims are fallible. If you read Vaidalya Sutra and Vigraha Vivartani Karika 31 to 51, Free learning, free inquiry encouraged here. Be ready to correct mistakes. We commit mistake, but I am ready to correct mistake. He is against any kind of rigid and dogmatic belief. Is it valuable? Yes, it is valuable. This attitude of critical reflection is valuable element in our life and thought because it opens the path of free inquiry and loosens the roads of prejudice, which is a hindrance to knowledge. It may be made the aim of our intellectual efforts to become conscious of the elements of uncertainty, obscurity, and vagueness, which are to be discovered by the careful analysis in different instances of knowledge. And philosophy here is, very critical reflections. Therefore, the charge of self-stultification against Nagarjuna can be resolved only at the expense of disallowing him to assert his position. Nagarjuna can motivate his whole undertaking by being negative and therapeutic, the word also used by Professor Prasad in the morning. He can portray his own discourse as simply a dispensable device to be thrown away once he has securely motivated us in the via negative of suspension of judgment and no assertions, a vehicles that ultimately self-destruct en route to silence. It is a kind of interpretation of Buddha's silence, akin to the Wittgensteinian ladder that must be kicked down after his work is done. Thank you so much for your patience. I was not sure that I could come here. Krishna was a teacher in our department. He started this T.R.V class. So after every class, every teacher will get a cup.
So let us have discussion after tea. Rest. To- so So I request Professor Tiwari to come to the podium and give his presidential remark. Because we have taken much time in hearing Professor Mohanta, I thank you on my part and on part of the department. Your lecture was well structured logically, and we all audience heard with patience. Professor Tiwari, come.
हिंदी में बोलेंगे। मैं अपनी बात हिंदी में रखता हूँ। I can speak in English, but the thing is that most of the people in the audience, they can understand better Hindi, and they are waiting to understand what the lecture is about. So, respected Professor Arvind Mishra, head of the department, the learned speaker, Professor Dilip Kumar Mahant, and the very learned philosopher Harishankar Prasad ji, and Professor Ambika Dutt Sharma ji, Professor Towski is here, he is from Tantra, and some scholars Tantra, क्या नाम है? So I cannot name all others, and my dear research scholars and respected teachers of the department. इस सभा में बहुत सारे लोग मौजूद हैं जो पूरी जिंदगी बुद्धिज्म को समझे हैं और समझाए हैं, जैसे हरिशंकर प्रसाद हैं, अंबिका दत्त जी हैं, और प्रोफेसर साहब का तो मैं नाम नहीं जानता, और उसमें से एक विशिष्ट हैं दिलीप कुमार महंत। मुझे ये पूरा स्मरण है कि मैं आज से 15-20 साल पहले दिलीप कुमार महंत के घर पर विजिट किया था, और वैदुल्य सूत्र की कोई टीका लिख रहे थे, तो उन्होंने दिखाया कि, तो मैंने देखा, मुझे अच्छा लगा। उसके पहले वो कुछ तत्व पल्लव सिंह पर काम किए थे, और संजोग से मैंने उसे पब्लिकेशन के लिए नॉर्थ बंगाल यूनिवर्सिटी को रिकमेंड किया था। तो ये उसके बाद लगातार बुद्धिज्म पर बहुत सारी किताबों को लिखा। स्केप्टिसिज्म पर भी इनकी किताब है, जो खास करके चार्वाक को लेकर के है, और पाश्चात्य जो ह्यूमवादी हैं उनको लेकर के है। तो विद्वता इनकी सिद्ध है। और आज जो आप सुने हैं 2.5 घंटे लगातार एक्सटेम्पोर, तो मेरी बात में कोई अतिशयोक्ति है ऐसा आपको नहीं लगेगा, ये सच है। अब इनका किस तरह से मूल्यांकन किया जाए। आज का टॉपिक था T.R.V मूर्ति, केसी भट्टाचार्य, इस तरह का। तो केसी भट्टाचार्य और T.R.V मूर्ति दोनों दो तरह से सोचते हैं, और एक का लॉयल्टी बुद्धिज्म के प्रति है, और दूसरे का मुझे लगता है कि जैनिज्म के प्रति ज्यादा है। तो दोनों का लक्ष्य भी अलग है, पर जो तरीका इन लोगों ने अपनाया कि हाउ टू फ्री आवर थॉट्स फ्रॉम डिफरेंट एलिजियंसेस टू डिफरेंट सिस्टम्स, डिफरेंट इंटरेस्ट टू डिफरेंट सिस्टम्स, इसमें केसी भट्टाचार्य ने अपने को पाया कि आई शुड बी हैंग्ड इन बिटवीन द आइडियोलॉजीज, आई शुड नॉट be captive of some or the other ideology, but I should use the different philosophies if they are useful to enhance or to come to our philosophical solution to the problems. ये उनका था। मूर्ति का आप जानते हैं कि प्रोफेसर मूर्ति इस विभाग में बहुत दिनों तक रहे, और उनकी परंपरा भी बहुत दिनों तक चली। बाद में अभी मुझे लगता है कि अभिमन्यु सिंह के बाद भी बहुत लोग होंगे, मैं नहीं जानता, पर A.K. चटर्जी ने जो विद्यार्थी अपने अंडर में रिसर्च कराया, वो सब सेंट्रल प्रॉब्लम्स ऑफ बुद्धिज्म को एक एक लाइन जो है गीता की तरह याद करते थे। हाँ, एक एक लाइन गीता की तरह। दूसरी किताब पढ़ने की उन लोगों को आवश्यकता नहीं होती थी। इस तरह के यहाँ काफी प्रोफेसर रहे हैं। अब तो आपके बीच में ऐसे लोग नहीं हैं जो गीता की तरह एक एक लाइन, और कुछ भी पढ़ाना हो वो जरूर बोलेंगे, कुछ भी बोलना हो वो लाइनें जरूर बोलेंगे। तो एक मानक एक ग्रुप के वो बन के चलते थे कि वो चिंतन की, प्रतिभा की एक मानक है, एक स्टैंडर्ड है, उनके आगे उनके लिए कुछ नहीं है। पर केसी भट्टाचार्य ठीक उसके विपरीत है। कोई भी अल्टीमेट थॉट नहीं, कोई भी एब्सोल्यूट थॉट नहीं है, कोई भी अल्टीमेट नहीं है। सबको देखना है, जो यूजफुल है आपके थॉट को ग्रो करने के लिए और फ्री करने के लिए, वो सब लेकर के आप आगे चलिए। कभी कभी लगता है कि जैनिज्म का शायद बात है वो उनको इस तरह प्रभावित किया कि वो इस तरह का सोचने के लिए मजबूर हुए। प्रोफेसर दिलीप महंत ने एक बड़ी बात एक लाइन में बहुत ब्रीफ में बुद्धिज्म के, खास करके नागार्जुन ब्रांड ऑफ जो ट्रेडिशन है, बताया कि उनकी फिलॉसफी के दो पक्ष हैं। एक पक्ष तो डिकंस्ट्रक्टिव है, जिसे प्रसंग, हाँ प्रश्न पता, ये सब प्रसंग की बात माने डिकंस्ट्रक्शन, प्रसंग मीन्स डिकंस्ट्रक्शन। तो जितनी पॉसिबिलिटी आपने आर्गुमेंट किया किसी चीज को सिद्ध करने के लिए, उसकी सारी पॉसिबिलिटीज वो प्रसंग उठाते हैं, तर्क, डिकंस्ट्रक्टिव तर्क, और कहते हैं कि ये इसमें से कोई स्टेब्लिश्ड नहीं है। स्टेब्लिश्ड माने ये जो कहना चाहते हैं, सिद्ध करना चाहते हैं, इस तर्क से वो सिद्ध ही नहीं कर पाता है। एटलीस्ट 50 से ऊपर 54 विकल्प तैयार करते हैं प्रसंग में। प्रोफेसर हरिशंकर प्रसाद और मोहंता साहब हैं, ये लोग ज्यादा विद्वान हैं, पर वो यही दिखाते हैं कि ये सारे विकल्प आपके क्वेश्चन के हो सकते हैं, या आपने जो सिद्धांत दिया है पॉजिटिव, उस पॉजिटिव सिद्धांत से आपका जो मोटिव है टू प्रूव समथिंग, वो आप प्रूव नहीं कर पाते हैं। इतनी पॉसिबिलिटियां हो सकती हैं उस आपके आर्गुमेंट के, और किसी भी पॉसिबिलिटी में स्टेबिलिटी नहीं है। तो द आर्गुमेंट्स गिवन बाय द अपोनेंट्स, other traditions, to prove or disprove something, they do not serve the purpose what they intend to do. तो एक तो डिकंस्ट्रक्टिव हुआ, और दूसरा क्या है, निहिलिस्टिक। तो आप जानते हैं बहुत संक्षेप में, जिसे कि हरिशंकर प्रसाद जी ने बहुत कुछ संकेत दिया, और प्रोफेसर महंत भी अब उसी दिशा में चल रहे थे, कि यह सत्य है कि नागार्जुन ने अपने सारे ग्रंथों में, चाहे आप माध्यमिक कार्य का देखिए, वो उन्होंने जितने भी तर्क की संभावनाएं हैं उसका वो खंडन करते हैं। तो ये डिकंस्ट्रक्टिव है, और ये शायद आप कह सकते हैं कि ये बुद्धि कौशल मात्र है, कुछ सिद्ध तो करता नहीं है। और दूसरा है निहिलिस्टिक, वितंडावादी, कि हम ये भी पोजीशन नहीं मानेंगे, ये भी पोजीशन नहीं मानेंगे, ये भी पोजीशन नहीं मानेंगे, हम कुछ मान, तो जाएगा कहाँ, तो शून्य की तरफ जाएगा। अब देखिए शून्य को किस तरह से इंटरप्रेट किया गया। एक तो शून्य को दो तरह से इंटरप्रेट कर सकते हैं। एक तो ये है कि शून्य माने शून्य का एक अर्थ है, शून्य माने शून्य एक शब्द है, उसका एक अर्थ है, पर इस अर्थ में नहीं लिया जाता कि शून्य एक शब्द है और इसका एक अर्थ है। क्योंकि जैसे बिलिंद पन्नो वगैरह में कहा रथ क्या है, तो रथ जो है नाम जाति, इसके अतिरिक्त नहीं है, न घोड़े हैं, न चक्के हैं, न वो सारी मटेरियल है। तो ये सब प्रभाव था, मुझे लगता है कि सारे पूरे बुद्धिज्म में रहा है। इसीलिए ये लोग रिकंस्ट्रक्टिव और निहिलिस्टिक बने। लेकिन निहिलिज्म का भी दो तरह का अर्थ हुआ। एक तो है प्रसज्य प्रतिषेध, कि हम कुछ मन में नहीं करेंगे, कोई पोजीशन नहीं मानेंगे, हाँ सारे पोजीशन का हम खंडन करेंगे, उसमें कोई ना कोई कमी है, ये वितंडावादी है। तो बचेगा क्या, शून्य। वो शून्य इसलिए कहते हैं कि सबके खंडन के बाद जो बचा, तो इसकी अपोहरीति से व्याख्या भी वो करते हैं। लेकिन जब अपोहरीति की व्याख्या करते हैं तो प्रसज्य प्रतिषेध की बात भूल जाते हैं बहुत लोग, और वहां वो लोग व्युदास प्रतिषेध की बात करते हैं, मतलब कि कुछ स्टेब्लिश भी करना है। अगौर गौ, सभी गाय का निषेध, गाय ये नहीं है, ये नहीं है, ये नहीं है, ये नहीं है, बैल नहीं है, घोड़ा नहीं है, उसके बाद उसका डिटर्मिनेशन होता है गौ शब्द का। तो इस तरह से भी हम जैसे कहते हैं अब्राह्मण, अब्राह्मण कहते हैं तो उसका क्या अर्थ हुआ, कोई ब्राह्मण नहीं। लेकिन अगर हम कहते हैं अब्राह्मण लाओ, तो आप किसी अब्राह्मण को ढूंढेंगे तो किसको लाएंगे, तो जिसमें ब्राह्मणत्व हो लेकिन पैदाइशी ब्राह्मण न हो। ये अर्थ करेंगे आप, या कुछ और भी अर्थ कर सकते हैं जो पढ़ा लिखा हो, इसमें त्याग तप हो। तो इस तरह से आप अपना अपना अर्थ लेते हैं। मूर्ति पर इस शून्य की व्याख्या, निहिलिज्म की स्थिति जो नागार्जुन ने, उसकी व्याख्या और जो माध्यमिक विज्ञानवाद का प्रभाव था, उसकी व्याख्या दोनों लेके करनी थी। लेकिन वो जानते थे कि बौद्ध समुदाय में ये दोनों फर्क लोगों को ज्ञात है, इसलिए, और बहुत सारे पाश्चात्य दर्शन भी वो पढ़े लिखे थे। तो उन्होंने कांट पर बड़ा अच्छा उनका सुनते हैं कि ज्ञान भी था। उन्होंने जो कांट का वो नॉलेज थियरी और शंकराचार्य के अद्वैत का प्रभाव था, तो इससे उन्होंने जो शून्य की व्याख्या है वो इस तरह की करने की कोशिश किया कि नागार्जुन जो है इस तरह से उपस्थित हो जाए कि ये नामजात झूठा नहीं है, एक ना, ये नामजात कांट की प्रतीति की तरह है, दैट आई कैन नो, वी कैन नो व्हाट अपीयर्स टू अस। पर जो अपीयर नहीं होता है थिंग इन इटसेल्फ, वो तो स्वलक्षण है, उसके बारे में प्रैक्टिकल रीजनिंग से चलेंगे, उसके बारे में क्रिटिकल रीजनिंग कुछ नहीं कहती। तो इसका प्रभाव उन पर था। और आप जानते हैं कि शून्य की व्युदास निषेध पूर्वक व्याख्या अगर नहीं की जाती तो बौद्ध साधना को स्थापित तर्कों के आधार पर नहीं किया जा सकता था, और तर्क तक सीमित करेंगे तो शून्यवाद ही परिणाम मिलता है, शून्य से आगे वो साधना की तरफ ले जाता है। इसको साधना पद्धति के रूप में ख्याति भी, एक आकर्षण देना था। तो इन सब दृष्टियों से ऐसा नहीं है कि उन्होंने बुद्ध नागार्जुन की दृष्टि या जो अन्य जो प्रसिद्ध बौद्ध हैं उनकी दृष्टि लेकर के, बल्कि शंकर और कांट इन दोनों के चश्मे से ही उन्होंने नागार्जुन के शून्यवाद को देखा, और शून्य की प्रसज्ज प्रतिषेधात्मक जो नागार्जुन की रीति थी उस रीति से व्याख्या न करके व्युदास प्रतिषेध इस रीति से व्याख्या किया। अब ये तो मैं जो नॉन बुद्धिज्म कभी पढ़ा नहीं, उसकी समझ हुई है इन लोगों को सुन करके, और इतना मैं बोल गया, ये एक तरह की मूर्खता होती है। पर अध्यक्ष के नाते प्रोफेसर आनंद मिश्रा जी ने और प्रोफेसर बालेश्वर जी ने मुझे अध्यक्ष पद पर बैठा दिया। मैं कहा कि मैं इसके योग्य नहीं हूं, पर जब अध्यक्ष पद पर बैठा दिया तो मुझे कुछ बोलना ही था। अंत में मैं ये कहूंगा कि बहुत सारे बातों को प्रोफेसर मोहंती ने कहा, उसमें जो बुद्धिज्म हो आप ग्राह्य कर लीजिए, आप बाकी सब चीजों को छोड़ दीजिए, हैं? तो बहुत कुछ आएगा मूर्ति के बारे में। एक बात तो किया कि मूर्ति के बारे में जो फर्दर स्टडीज होगी उसके प्रति आप लोग भी आकर्षित होंगे, और इन विद्वानों को, जैसे मान लीजिए कि अंबिका दत्त शर्मा है, प्रोफेसर हरिशंकर प्रसाद जी हैं, इन लोगों को भी आप लोग एक अथॉरिटी के रूप में कंसल्ट करेंगे। ये जो बुद्धिज्म को समझते हैं और मूर्ति को समझते हैं, उस दृष्टि से जब आपका रिसर्च बुद्धिज्म पर चलेगा तो निश्चित रूप से वो एक नई चीज होगी और परंपरा का भी उससे विकास होगा। कुछ मूर्ति साहब ने एक प्रेसिडेंशियल लेक्चर दिया था आईपीसी में, शब्द पर भी। उस समय तो शब्द पर बहुत कम लोग, इंडियन लोग काम करते थे। 1 मिनट और लेंगे, 1 मिनट, ज्यादा समय नहीं। पर उसका बड़ा वेलकम हुआ। मैं जब आपकी अवस्था में था, रिसर्च करता था, तो मैं सुनता था कि वो प्रेसिडेंट्स थे और उन्होंने काफी अच्छा एक लेख दिया था जो छपा था आईपीक्यू में, और वो प्रेसिडेंशियल लेक्चर था। मैं भी गया, मैं भी उसको पढ़ा तो मुझे अच्छा लगा कि पहला प्रयास तो ये है, पर मैंने उसमें भी बुद्धिज्म का प्रभाव देखा। जो उन्होंने भर्तृहरि के स्फोट को एक रहस्यात्मक एंटिटी माना, मिस्टिकल एंटिटी, मिस्टिकल एंटिटी माना। पर भर्तृहरि ने मिस्टिकल नहीं माना। भर्तृहरि विस्फोट को कहते हैं जो शब्द विचार रूप में आपके दिमाग में हमारी ध्वनियों से प्रकाशित होता है, तो प्रकाशित होने वाला शब्द है। और स्फोट हमेशा वर्तमान में प्रकाशित होता है। तो जो वर्तमान में प्रकाशित होता है उसको तो हम साक्षात जानते हैं, तो वो तो कॉग्निटिव बीइंग है। लेकिन उस कॉग्निटिव बीइंग को मिस्टिकल कहे, तो मैं टेक्स्ट से देखा तो मुझे लगा कि यहाँ थोड़ा सा पता नहीं बुद्धिज्म का प्रभाव होगा, या एक टेंडेंसी होती है कि हम जितना दूसरे के विचारों से निरपेक्ष होना चाहते हैं, जितना दूसरे के विचारों से अपने को की कैप्टिविटी से हम अपने को अलग करना चाहते हैं, फ्री करना चाहते हैं, उतना ही हमारे दृष्टि में वो बना हुआ जो दृष्टि है, किसी शास्त्र की वासना से, किसी संप्रदाय की वासना की दृष्टि, उससे हम दूसरों को देखने लगते हैं जब हम पॉजिटिव काम करने लगते हैं। नेगेटिव में तो कोई परेशानी नहीं है, खंडन कर दो, इसको भी खंडन कर दो, इसको भी खंडन कर दो, यह भी स्टेब्लिश थॉट नहीं है, यह भी स्टेब्लिश थॉट नहीं है, यह भी स्टेब्लिश। लेकिन जब पॉजिटिव होते हैं दूसरे के बारे में, तो हम अपनी वासना को भूल नहीं पाते हैं। ये एक बड़ा अमल है, और जब तक यह अमल नहीं जाएगा, आपकी जो अपनी दृष्टि बन गई है उससे अगर आप प्रभावित हो रहे हैं, तो भी आप सही में वाइज दार्शनिक नहीं हैं। आपको सभी दृष्टियों से अलग हटके अपने थॉट को फ्री करना होगा। और यही होता है दर्शन का मतलब। दर्शन कोई बौद्ध का दर्शन तक सीमित नहीं है, जैन के दर्शन या षट संप्रदाय तक सीमित नहीं है। दर्शन एक प्रतिभा, एक बुद्धि है, जिसमें हम सारे रुचियों, वासनाओं, वस्तु के प्रति अपने जो लगाव हैं, उनसे अपने माइंड को फ्री करके देखते हैं। ये एक दृष्टि दर्शन है। दर्शन वस्तुओं को नहीं देखता, दर्शन विचारों को देखता है। दृष्टि धातु लगा है तो आंख से देखना नहीं है, ये अपने ज्ञान से विचार को समझना है, देखना है, निरीक्षण परीक्षण करना है। और इसी धर से आपको बौद्ध दर्शन भी करना चाहिए, जैन भी करना चाहिए, अन्य दार्शनिक करना चाहिए, और जो नए विचार आ रहे हैं उनको भी देखना चाहिए कि दर्शन उनके में कितना डेवलप्ड है। इन्हीं सब शब्दों से मैं आप सबसे
Thank you, sir, for your beautiful presidential remark. Now I request Dr. Niti ji for formal vote of thanks. Please come.
Thank you, sir. Yeah. Okay, good evening, everyone. I'm Neeta Singh, Assistant Professor in the Department of Philosophy and Religion, Banaras Hindu University, Varanasi. And we know that we have successfully completed the first day of the T.R.V. Murti lecture series on Buddhism. And this is the time to be grateful for all those who have collectively made this academic event successful. So in this order, first of all, I would like to thank Sir Professor D.N. Tiwari, a former professor and head at this very department, who presided over this session and given his wonderful remarks in order to give us more insights about the topic. Sir, we are privileged to have you with us. And I thank you on the behalf of the Department of Philosophy and Religion that you graciously accepted our invitation to chair the session. Now I extend my heartfelt thanks to our speaker, Sir Professor D.K. Mohanta, a former professor and head at the Department of Philosophy, University of Calcutta. Oh, sorry. Is present head and professor at the Department of Philosophy, University of Calcutta. So, sir, sorry. Former Vice Chancellor. Thank you, sir. So I thank you, sir, for your clear, insightful, and informative lecture on the topic No Thesis Argument and Nagarjuna. It was truly a blessing to hear you on such a complex and tough topic that you made so easy. With your effective speech and engaging presentation, you delivered your lecture smoothly and lucidly, for which you truly deserve our hearty thanks, admiration, and applaud. Thank you so much, sir, for wonderful presentation. And interaction is not there, so sorry. I thank Sir Professor Anand Mishra, the head of the department, for his constant efforts to bring this prestigious institution's glory back to it. And Sir is working really hard to carry this department academically forward. And this thanks would merely be a small word for his efforts. Sir Professor H.S. Prasad, a retired professor and former head of the Department of Philosophy, University of Delhi, is among us, and he delivered an exhaustive lecture at the forenoon session. We all heard him. So thank you, sir, for being here with us, and as well as for presenting the abstruse aspects of Buddhism through your lecture. Sir Professor Ambika Datta Sharma, Professor and Head at the Department of Philosophy, Dr. Hari Singh Gaur University Sagar, is present here, and we are eagerly waiting for his talk that will take place tomorrow at 2 p.m. forward. So thank you, sir, for coming and being a part of this lecture series. Sir Professor Mark Daiskowski was also in the hall. He just left, but I extend my deep regards to him as well. Also, I would like to thank Sir Dr. Briskishore Tripathi, Government Degree College, Orai, for his active participation. Thank you, sir. And Sir Professor R.K. Jha, Dr. Pramod Kumar Bagre, Dr. Kalpana, Dr. Rahul, Dr. Priyanka, and other faculty members from our department and other departments also deserve our hearty thanks for being available as enthusiastic listeners since the morning session. And all the participants and students who are listening to our distinguished speakers so patiently deserve our thanks and appreciation. And those who raised important questions demanding further clarification in the forenoon session deserve a big applaud for their patient listening and taking steps for further mental exercise. I thank each and everyone for technical, for technical and other supports. I'm grateful to Ashish Anand, Rajneesh Mishra, Aradhana and Karuna Nidhan. And for all the online participants, I send my thanks. And finally, I thank the catering team and all the office staff for their constant support and cooperation. Thank you so much, one and all. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Nitiji. And with this, we have come to the completion of today's lecture. And we will have the third lecture of this series from 2 p.m. onward. So, thank you all.